Morning and welcome everyone to this boot camp for Thursday, November 12th. We are excited that you're all able to join us today. Before we get started with our presentation, we do just want to remind you of some resources available to you through the Arizona Commerce Authority. Again, my name is Faith Ritchie and I'm the Small Business Programs Manager here at the ACA, and I'm excited to be with you again today for today's boot camp. First and foremost, we need to thank all of our community partners. Without them and their efforts, we would not be able to do some of the great work that we're able to do. As a reminder, the ACA Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective were designed to help prepare small businesses of less than 20 employees to emerge from the COVID crisis stronger than ever. It is a statewide initiative supported by our amazing community partners, and it will be ongoing, not just through this year, but into 2021. So please be sure to check our website to register for upcoming sessions. If you have missed a session or you want to review material, all of our previous sessions and boot camps are online on our website. So that way you can review to your pleasure and you can review all of that additional information. If there is information that you did not find in the Bootcamp live series and you're still looking for additional COVID recovery information, please go to our Resource Collective. The Resource Collective is statewide resources available to equip all businesses to return stronger, and it's a great complement to our Bootcamp series. This is an example of our Resource Collective. As you can see, it covers many different industries and topics. So again, if you're looking for additional reopening information, support, guidance, please check that information. Additional financial updates. These links will not only be on our website, but if you do want more information regarding these grants and loan programs, please let us know in the chat box and we can send those links to you directly. For additional COVID mitigation measures, you can always check our website at azcommerce.com/COVID-19. And it's also a good time to consider the different ACA programs available to you, from small business to Arizona at Work to our manufacturing extension partnership. If you are looking to start a small business or you're looking to grow or maybe to pivot your current business, there are programs available, and all of the information about these specific programs will also be on our ACA website. The Small Business Checklist, if you have not checked it out already, is an interactive and intuitive online source. It allows people to be guided through local, state, and federal licensing information, and it is a free service. So if you go again to our website, azcommerce.com/smallbiz, you can go through this checklist to make sure your new business or your extension of your business is registered correctly. For additional COVID-19 information that maybe you did not gather through the Bootcamp series or the Resource Collective, we do recommend that you visit the ArizonaTogether.org website. This will give you all of the additional COVID-19 information and resources available throughout the state of Arizona. Now, this slide is a little bit busier than you usually see, and that's because we have added a special session. So on top of our standard boot camp sessions for Tuesday and Thursday of next week, we will also be doing a Wednesday special session for restaurant relief. This is a collaborative effort, again, reminding you all of our amazing community partners of the Arizona Restaurant Association, the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, as well as the City of Mesa and Maricopa County will all be represented in this panel for those of you who are looking to leverage temporary expansion on the premises for outdoor dining. So if that is something you're interested in, please register. It's going to be the same registration as today's boot camp, and you can register again. This is going to be a special session on Wednesday, November 18th at the same time at 9 a.m. And now for the reason you are all here today. Brian J. Burt, he has spoken to us before. However, today he is talking about how to motivate and incentivize employees, something we are all interested in knowing more about. So Brian, thank you so much again for being with us today. And without further ado, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be here again, and I will throw the slides up and we'll get started. All right, can you see that?
I do not see your slides yet. Perfect.
All right, is that good?
That's great, Brian. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for everyone for being here today. We're going to talk in the next hour about how to motivate and incentivize your employees. We've got a lot of stuff packed into an hour. It's normally kind of an hour and a half or so presentation. So I'm going to go pretty quickly. I would be happy to share a copy of the program after if you want to have it as a reference piece or to use in your business. So feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to get you that. Email's there on the screen. And we'll try to answer some questions as we go. So if you have some, feel free to put them in the question and answer box, which I've got up on the screen here, and I'll try to monitor that as well. Also, always happy to give a free consultation to anyone who is not a current client, would like to chat about any of the issues you see in the presentation today. So if you're interested in doing so, feel free to, again, shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll get that on the calendar. Just a quick background about the firm for those who may not be as familiar with us. We've been around for a long time here in Phoenix. We got about 450 lawyers and are now 15 locations, a little less than half in here in Phoenix, and a true full service firm. So all the resources you might need to start, grow, and sell your business. Some of the rankings we've won over the years, and lots more information available on the website, including my emerging business blog, which I've done now for I think 10 years or so. And we've got articles of interest to entrepreneurs and their companies, or folks like myself who work with entrepreneurs. Not really legal stuff, but other, again, topics of interest. So check that out. There's usually a once a week post for you. If you're active on social media, feel free to post some friendly feedback on emerging business with OneUs. And just a quick bit, as Faith mentioned, run our firm's emerging business group here at the Snell Wilmer, and essentially get to live vicariously through lots of different entrepreneurs in all shapes and sizes from start to finish as you start and grow your company and hopefully facilitate that exit event on the back end. So today's topic is a timely one. We've all been through a tough 2020, I'm sure. Some businesses hanging on for dear life. Others did very well because they were perfectly positioned, maybe unbeknownst to themselves, to take advantage of this virtual environment. So we've seen kind of all shapes during the COVID crisis here. So here's what a lot of people have told me throughout the year. How do you motivate folks? Well, tell them they have a job and they can keep it. So for lots of people, that's the sentiment. We're still around. They're still employed, so they should be happy. And like I just said, however, there's lots of businesses that are thriving, notwithstanding what's happened in 2020. And so unfortunately, for many employees, just indicating they can keep the current job is not quite enough to get them from A to B and make sure they stick with your company and continue to do what you need them to do. So today's agenda, again, we're going to move pretty quickly. A lot of good information, hopefully, for you. Talk about improving life at the office, improving quality of life, creating job security, use of bonuses, giving employees ownership without giving equity, and then giving people actual equity in your company. So there is a great set of studies that MetLife does each year. I'm just going to go through kind of a couple of the highlights. I encourage you to check that out on your own. It's really packed with information. They do it annually. About employees, and this year they did a kind of pre-COVID survey and then realized what was happening and did kind of a post-COVID or into COVID kind of time frame where they interviewed people both before and during the crisis and got a lot of good information, a lot of good statistics, a lot of good trends kind of evolving. No surprise by what you see on the screen here. Things are changing pretty rapidly. Whether they stay that way or not, we'll see. Some people like the work from home, others hate it, and businesses are struggling to figure out what's it going to look like when we come out the other side. So it's the 18th annual study. Again, check it out. Just some major findings that probably no one is surprised by. If you look at the top 5 programs that employees say will ease the stress and improve well-being, increased paid time off, work from home. Although again, lots of folks have work from home fatigue and are looking to return to the office and interact with their colleagues as soon as that becomes viable for their particular company. But most people are feeling pretty burned out at this stage after we've been kind of 8 months into it. So one of the things that the study does, and again, I encourage you to check it out, is to indicate kind of the difference or the delta between what the employers think they're doing and how well they think they're doing it and what the employees think they're doing. And often that discrepancy is pretty pronounced. So for employers who are offering benefits and support, at least as from the employee's perspective, here's how the employees feel with respect to those employers. So you can see that the impact is significant. So to the extent that you're an employer on the call here, thinking about how to motivate your folks, making sure they understand and agree that you're offering the benefits and support they think are important really generates a lot of goodwill, and you've got productive, engaged, and successful employees. Now, the definition of what employees want, no surprise, is changing as we move into the kind of millennial era and Gen Z beyond that. And so, again, I'm going to throw up a couple of bullets here that show you the expectations are shifting. In the kind of Gen X generation, which I'm a part of, it was fairly simple. You know, you pay more, offer bonuses, increase comp, and you typically get the results you're looking for. Not so much necessarily with the younger generations. So supporting what they believe is their kind of holistic well-being through these 4 categories: physical, financial, mental health, and social health, make a measurable difference. And again, you can see on the screen there, kind of a 1-point increase in quote-unquote well-being translates into a significant increase in engagement, loyalty, and productivity. Must-have benefits. So this is something I thought was really interesting, again, when you break it apart by the generations. So boomers and Gen X focused on retirement as they get older, some prescription drug coverage, but for the youngsters, all relative, of course, student loan assistance and forgiveness. So 36% view that in Gen Z as a must-have benefit. And there's some large companies out there, as you know, that are providing for those benefits already, but not so much in the small companies, private companies, startups, etc. So something to think about. And supporting well-being will be crucial for the recovery and preparing for kind of what happens in the new normal. Again, no one's quite sure what that's going to look like. So improving life at the office, I put at the office in quotes because, again, some of you may have been working from home for 8 months. I've been back for, I think, 5 or 6 months now. I've had my fill of the working from home stuff. But the key question a lot of folks are wrestling with, and we wrestle with it here, and I'm sure you are as well, can a company's culture survive when people are not in the office? And I think lots of companies are concluding that it's really difficult to generate, maintain, and nurture culture when people are remote. There's only so much you can do with a Zoom call or a phone call. And I know everyone's trying to be safe, but at the end, there's probably a point at which people get called back in, or there's events or other things, or a combination that allow people to interact. It's difficult to maintain culture, to train, to mentor when you have people scattered kind of throughout the geographic area. So in terms of improving life at the office, some of the old tips certainly have not changed. And in fact, they may have been increased. You know, people are very stressed out, concerned about things, uncertain what's going to happen. And so creating a culture, which lots of folks talk about, few companies actually implement, or at least do a good job of it, is becoming increasingly important. People want to know that the company has a future. They want to know there's actual vision for the company. And you're encouraged to obviously put one together, but then hire people that believe in it, not just hiring random individuals that can do the job, but folks that actually buy in. Demand accountability, rebuild trust or build the trust. Again, nothing that should surprise you there, but lessons that are becoming increasingly important as companies struggle to survive here in the downturn. Fostering communication, even if it's bad. We've tried to do a really good job of that here at the firm. Hopefully you've seen the same in your company. Even when news is not good, letting folks know what to expect certainly helps bridge that gap and ease the uncertainty that folks feel. Not knowing what's coming next can really be a hit to morale. Balance consistency with innovation. Lots of folks are looking for routines, looking for, again, that new normal, but you have to continue to innovate in your company, particularly those within the tech space. If you don't do that, obviously, you're not going to survive as we move into 2021. And some of the things that we've seen as hot button issues in terms of creating a respectful workplace, that's should be a given, but it's become increasingly important, as you've seen throughout the headlines over the past year plus. And really important to make sure folks feel like they're part of it. Providing regular feedback and a clear path for advancement, things that seem to have fallen away a little bit as we talk to clients. Again, when people are focused on surviving, some of these other things tend to fall away, but they're really important for the individual who says, hey, I'm working hard, doing what I can, notwithstanding all the challenges, and I would just want to know that I'm doing a good job. I want to get some feedback, I get a review, and really understand where things sit for me. Again, given all that's happening, is there still a path for advancement, and what does that look like? So again, nothing on the screen here that is rocket science, but a lot of these things tend to fall away when we get into these crises, and really important for the folks on the ground who aren't leading the company, don't know what's happening, and don't know what their place is for the future. It helps to make sure that they do. So some of these things, again, I'm not going to go through each one of them for time's sake, but you look at telecommuting, which used to be a big request for the millennial and Gen Z folks who said, hey, I really like to work a day or two at home. Well, obviously that's totally flipped on its head. And so we'll see what happens after people start coming back into the office, if in fact that's the game plan. But lots of these things on here you can't do well if you're scattered about. Company events in particular, lots of people say, hey, I don't care as much about the holiday party or the event at the office until you take it away. And then people say, well, geez, I really miss that. So there's opportunities to connect live. It might not be necessarily on site, maybe it's off site until people can get back in the office in greater capacity. But lots of these things have become increasingly important. If you can't count on your company's technology to work from home, it's almost impossible to do that. And the final piece, which I know we've been doing quite a bit here over the last 8-9 months, and that is ask folks what they need to be productive, again, given the changing environment, and talk to them about what they think it's going to look like after all this is over. And there may be ways to create some efficiencies and do some things that you really didn't think of before, but now that might be an opportunity to do that. So with that, we're going to jump into kind of creating employment agreements. And as we move from kind of the soft stuff into the kind of more hardcore options, important to denote what the difference is. In Arizona here, you can have at-will employment, which means you can terminate people with or without cause, with the exceptions you see listed. Or you can enter into an employment agreement, which basically means if you terminate someone without cause, there's typically a consequence, some kind of severance package. And that can vary depending on what you're interested in. Most employers are going to keep almost everybody at will. Again, this is usually a tool for incentivizing key members of the team, maybe the executive group or others who say, hey, I'd like to leave my current opportunity and come over, but I need to know you're giving me a couple-year deal, so it's worth my while. I'm not going to be out in the street after 6 months, or to retain people who are already on the team. So I like to throw up some real life examples that we see, and normally if this was live, we kind of get some audience participation, but these are quotes or comments or things in documents that make you wonder, what is the relationship? And this is something I'm sure folks have said, meaning well, but comments can be, should things turn sideways, construed by employees to suggest that the employment relationship is not at will. So, we'll take care of you. Certainly sounds nice enough. What about an employee handbook that specifies a process for terminating employees. I'm not going to make you raise your hands because I can't see you, but normally we would ask folks how many people on the call who run companies have pulled things off the internet or borrowed stuff from friends or gotten things from other sources and really didn't do a deep dive to understand what's in there. So we see people take handbooks, really not look at them, and they find on the back end when they're trying to terminate folks, hey, I didn't realize there was a protocol or process in there for doing it, and now we've got to follow it. It's not necessarily as agile as we thought it would be. Here's another one that I suspect some folks have said in one shape or another over the past 8 or 9 months as we've gone through this crisis. And again, what does this mean? Does this mean that they can continue to stay as long as they don't do really bad stuff, or is it still an active relationship? What if the employee handbook itself says that there's only a termination for just cause? And what does just cause mean? There'd be as many definitions as we have people on the call today, because there is no one legal definition out there. So when you talk about we can only fire you for cause, if that's even something you consider, you got to understand what that means and document that. So all real life examples that could shift the at-will status of your employees. To avoid issues in the context, you want a uniform set of stuff. Written materials, which include applications, offer letters, employee handbooks, and they've got to be consistent throughout or you create some legal problems for yourself. Provide that at-will status can't be changed by any oral agreements. So again, when you're in those reviews or interviews or other conversations, something you say, again, well-intended, doesn't come back to bite you. And ensure that it's only a written statement by certain, whether it's the president or other key managers that can shift that. And when you do have your own protocols, you've got to follow those protocols. It's fairly easy to get yourself in trouble in any case, but certainly if you don't do the things that you've got in writing. And again, what are the terms of an agreement? Let's say you decide to motivate one or more people with employment agreements. And again, some real life examples. We mentioned this already. You don't define cause. What's that mean? Does it mean that they have to do something violent in the workplace to get terminated, or does it mean that if they just don't perform up to expectations, they can get terminated? Well, you know what the employee is going to argue if things go sideways. What if it defines cause but doesn't include a term? So it says you can be terminated for cause. It says what that means, but there's no term. You always want to make sure you've got a term in there, whether it's a 6 months, a year, 2 years. Otherwise, the employee is going to interpret it as going on in perpetuity unless they trigger that clause provision. It says that they can, they're going to serve as maybe the vice president of marketing, but doesn't specify the related responsibilities and how they can be changed. This is a big one. It encourages them to, or says they're going to receive a performance bonus, but no idea as to how it's going to be calculated, when it's paid, who makes that determination. And talks about the compensation and benefits that are going to be received if there's a without cause termination, no cause termination, but it doesn't detail what those are. It says there's going to be some severance, but it doesn't indicate exactly how that's calculated or what that means. All things that create all sorts of heartache for employers who are trying to do things they think are going to benefit the business, maybe terminating an employee that's not quite working out, and they end up in all sorts of mess, perhaps some litigation over that employment agreement that's not properly drafted. So here are the minimum terms that you may want to see in an agreement to make sure it's going to work for you instead of against you. Highlighting the position and responsibilities, and as you'll see in most of these bullets, the ability to change or expand them, because things do change over the course of time. If it's a 1 or 2 or 3 year agreement, you may need to shift that person around or change responsibilities, and you want to be able to do so without them declaring a breach. A salary, a base salary, and how that can be changed. Benefits, reserving the right to change. Benefits may change pretty radically over the next a year or so as we kind of factor in the COVID stuff and beyond. And so you want to have flexibility to change the benefit package for the entire company and not be wedded to something that you want to get rid of or alter for that one employee. When do they start and end? And be very careful about the renewal terms. People say they're going to monitor, they never do. So that agreement goes in the drawer, and all of a sudden you find out your guy's on the hook for another year, even though you wanted to terminate the relationship. Define cause, we've talked about that, but make sure you permit termination without cause. You should always be able to terminate the relationship. It's just a question of what happens when you do. And then there should be some very clear severance provisions. What does it mean? And it can be shorter than the term. If you have a 3-year agreement, you may have 6 months worth of severance. Don't try to slide that in. That's not going to go over well with the employee. I know some folks have suggested, hey, let's do a 20-year term, but we can terminate and only pay 6 months. Well, to the employee who's paying attention, it's a 6-month deal. And if they're not paying attention, they're not going to be real happy if they find out it's only a 6-month deal when you terminate them in year 2. Bonuses, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Make sure it is very clear who's eligible and how do you calculate this. We've seen lots of lawsuits, some in the millions, when people think I should get bonuses or continue to get bonuses, and the employer thinks differently. So really make sure you understand how it's calculated, when are they eligible, is it renewed on an annual basis, or is it subject to change, and how exactly is that bonus going to be determined. So speaking of bonuses, let's talk about them. Most companies will use some type of bonus programs, and I tend to think about them in 3 buckets. One is the completely discretionary bonus. So there's no eligibility standards or formula. You just do it on an ad hoc basis. And you might look at how the company and the individual did over a given year and decide, hey, I'm going to give you a gift card to your favorite restaurant, or I'm going to give you $500, or it could be something much more substantive, but it's very informal. There's no expectation that you're doing it. There's no requirement that you're doing it. You just do it on a random basis. Secondly, there's the minimum eligibility. So, we have here at the firm, for example, if associates bill, like many law firms, a certain number of hours in a given year, then they're eligible for a bonus. There's no set formula as to how that's going to pan out, how much bonus they'll receive, et cetera. It's really based on lots of factors, but they know, hey, if I at least hit this trigger, I'm going to be eligible for it. And that may be something that's appropriate for your company. And finally, there is a minimum eligibility or fixed formula. If you think about a person who's a sales agent for the company or in that zone, this may be appropriate where you say, hey, if you do X, you're going to get Y. And so they know if I sell 20 widgets, I'm going to get paid $100. And all of these, well, I should say that the second and third are things you want to get down in writing. And it depends on what you're doing. It may be a half page. It doesn't have to be a treatise. As it gets more complex, you may need to put a little more meat on that bone, but you really want to make sure there's something in writing, because people always tend to remember things differently if the employee has a falling out with you, and it's going to be remembered in their favor, and you're going to end up fighting about it. And putting it on paper and giving it to them and making sure it's in the file saves you a lot of brain damage if there's ever a question about what was promised or not. The liquidity bonus. So, and I know we're moving quickly, so if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the box. But a lot of times employees say, look, I appreciate that there may be employment agreements. You may give out some bonuses, all nice, and I appreciate that. And, you may give some employees some of these and other employees different components. So there's no mutual exclusivity. You may give an employee all these things, but typically you're going to tailor the approach and the motivational tools based on the employee who you're trying to motivate. And different levels of employees are going to end up getting different things. So just know that these are all tools in the basket that you can use depending on your workplace, your workforce, and what you think is appropriate. So a lot of employees say, you know what, again, I appreciate what you're doing on an ongoing basis, but if I'm going to work hard, particularly in these tough times, and grow the company with you, I want to know that there is an opportunity for me to earn a kind of a piece of the action when the company goes to liquidate. So I'm going to work for you for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I just want to know that, again, there's an opportunity to take full advantage of that growth, that appreciation that I helped create, when that time comes for that to happen. So a lot of employers will default to saying, you know what, do you want a piece of equity? And employees tend to default to that sometimes. Yeah, I'd like some equity. I'd like some stock. I'd like some units if it's an LLC. I'd like to actually be an owner. That would be fantastic. Makes me feel good. Some psychological benefits. I feel like I'm really part of the team. And for those who have given out pieces of the company historically, it can be challenging to have people as co-owners. Even if they own a small amount, lots of issues come with it. We'll talk about those here in the last part of the program. And so there are ways, a couple ways, to give folks a piece of the action without having to give them a piece of the company. And the liquidity bonus is one that's been really popular in the last couple of years. I've been doing lots of these, working on a couple as we speak. And essentially, what it is what it sounds like. When the company goes through a sale transaction, then those employees get a piece of that pie. And it can be a fixed amount or based on a formula. So to the extent that, you know, you say, hey, if we sell the company, I'll pay you $10,000 for your service. I mean, obviously that's a simple approach. A lot of times though, it's based on a formula, and it says, you know, we're going to get a pot of cash when we sell the company. We're going to, and the second bullet here, as you see, you want to make sure it's based on a net amount, what the owners actually net from the sale. There's typically lots of expenses associated with selling your company, legal and accounting fees, could be investment banking fees. You have to repay debt and other obligations. So you want to make sure it's a net number. And then there's a pool created. So, you know, once we get down to that pool, we're going to set aside, whether it's 5%, 10%, or something else, a pool that we will distribute to those who have been part of the program. And you can base it on time and or performance requirements. So you can say, hey, for every year that you're here with me through the sale, I'm going to give you a piece of that pool. Or if you do certain things to contribute to the growth of the company, you're going to earn additional pieces of that pool. Or you could do both. Again, it's a pretty blank slate. So you can figure out what you need to get out of a given employee to really make them valuable, and what do you feel they contribute, and then distribute those pieces of that pool in that fashion. Key tip, make sure that you don't terminate folks unless they're really doing bad stuff right before sale. And this is going to apply to any of these programs. If folks are coming due a bonus and they get terminated 2 weeks before you sell the company and they're out 50 grand, you can assure yourself lawsuits coming your way. If they truly are doing bad things and you need to terminate them, typically that stuff's going to surface well before you sell the company, and make sure you pull the trigger well before that sale event occurs. So some folks you know, do have things happen in that timeline that makes it challenging, but consult with your friendly neighborhood lawyer before you would do that, because we've seen plenty of lawsuits generated when folks feel like they've been mistreated. So it's a nice feature because, as I mentioned, it avoids actual ownership and all the related issues. It's just a bonus program. You've got to document it, though. This is not something you want to put out there in a conversation during an annual review or otherwise and say, yeah, if we sell the company, again, we'll take care of you, we'll give you something, don't worry about it. You want to make sure you put a plan in place to understand who participates, what the criteria are, what the payout is, and there's no disputes when the sale happens. A couple examples, we've talked about the first one, so that's really simple. We'll pay you if and when the company sells and you're part of it. Here's another example, more common, where you say, hey, we're going to take a net proceeds piece of the action, and you're going to get 2% of that. And again, you can make it as creative as you like. You can require the employee to be employed with you when that sale happens, or you can say, look, you'll keep what you've earned. You'll lose what you haven't earned if you decide to jump off the ship, but we'll pay you for what you've earned when the company sells. So they know they have that in the bank, if you will. And again, encourage you to make sure it's a net number. Lots of costs and expenses and other things that people don't realize is going to be kind of taken out of that pot differently than would be the case when you're just operating the company. You're not going to have a lot of these issues just on a day-to-day basis when you're paying bonuses that you will when it comes time to sell the company. So another approach, which is kind of gets you a little closer to ownership without being ownership, is phantom stock or stock appreciation rights. And most people have probably heard of at least phantom stock. You may not know exactly what it is, but you've heard the term. And so while the liquidity bonus is really a pool, from my perspective, it's a little bit easier for employees to get their arms around. If you say, hey, I'm putting aside 10% of the net proceeds, easy to understand, and they're just interested in what percentage of that 10% do I get. And so I found it's a plan that's a little easier to put together and administer, and for the employees to kind of understand their piece of that pie. But for folks who say, you know what, for psychological reasons, which are important, I really want to make sure that my piece of the pie, even though it's not actual ownership, I wanted to kind of track the founder's ownership. Founders got stock. I understand you don't want to give me any, but I still want to feel like an owner. So give me some phantom stock. So as your stock appreciates, then I will be able to see my phantom stock appreciate and kind of track that. So those plans talk a little bit about what they look like. Phantom stock is basically like the liquidity bonus. It's a right to receive a bonus at a specified date equal to the fair market value of shares of stock, or it could be units in a limited liability company. You look at a little example up there, pretty simple. When they sell the company, a share of stock's worth $1. They have 5 restricted stock units, they get $5. Stock appreciation rights, and these terms are used interchangeably. So if you say, hey, that I thought the phantom stock was more of the stock appreciation right, again, the terms get used for both approaches. The key thing is how you're calculating it. So if you look at the stock appreciation right, which is what a lot of people think of as phantom stock, I'm going to give you a bonus right. We're going to give you a piece of future appreciation. So it's going to be set at $1. That's today's value, and we sell it's $2.50. So the delta is $1.50. And that's what most people think makes sense, because it really encourages that employee to contribute either individually and or from a company perspective to the growth of the company and that value. And you're going to get a piece of that action, the piece of that value that you help create. And so as you can see, it's a little more complex than simply throwing a pool together. You've got to figure out along the way what's the stock worth, and that can get into some some effort. Certainly doable. We create lots of these plans, but it's a little more involved and a little more, there's a number of additional issues to potentially navigate as you walk through it. The advantages, like the liquidity bonus, you feel like owners without giving away actual equity. They share in that appreciation and don't have to make any form of investment, which is nice. You don't have to worry as an employee that you have stock that's illiquid. How do I sell the stock? When can I sell it? You're just worried about getting your bonus when the time comes. And it avoids making them a minority shareholder, which comes with some challenges, as we'll talk about in a minute. So there's no dilution, no documentation, no voting issues, all that stuff that you're thinking about for those who may have or historically have had partners. None of these things kind of come to light. Employee gets taxed when they get the bonus. There's some exceptions, but generally speaking, again, it's when it happens, so that's nice. Disadvantages, obviously, it's not quite ownership. So for people who say, I really need to be an owner for this to work for me, it doesn't do that. It's ordinary income, depending on how the tax rules get altered in the new administration coming in. That may not be as big a deal as it was historically, but currently there's a sizable difference between tax rates. So you have financial dilution to the owner yourself if you're the company owner. So you kind of have to keep track of both the ownership from a corporate standpoint, which you may have 100% of, and the economic ownership, because you've now given away a piece of the company for those employees. So you need to make sure that you kind of track that as you go through. And has an impact on cash flow, but again, if it's triggered when the company sells, not a big deal there. Once they get paid, they wouldn't continue to share in that growth, so you may give them additional kind of phantom stock at that time if that's something that makes sense. And there's some other issues you see on the screen there. For time's sake, we won't go into all those, but know that you have to navigate some of these additional issues. Like I said, certainly doable, a little more complex than liquidity bonus, but for some employees, it's an important program and something they think is going to best incentivize them to perform in the way you hope they are. Actual company ownership. So the last piece of the program here, and again, feel free to ask questions. I know we're throwing a lot out at you. Ways to make employees owners. There's several ways, as you see on the screen there. They can get a stock option if you are in a corporation. You can get restricted stock, or you can purchase stock. So we're not going to talk a whole lot about just purchasing stock, but that's certainly an option. So whether you're purchasing stock in a corporation, units in an LLC, if an employee wants to become an owner by becoming an investor in the company, that can be a great way to bring them in. They buy the equity interest at fair market value. They put money in, so they've got skin in the game. And, lots of employees are interested in doing something like that, depending on their financial situation. And it really does, help to align those incentives, because they got their own money in the game. And if they've put a couple bucks in, not as incentivizing, obviously, if they've got, 5 or 10,000 in, but either way, they've actually had to put some cash in that they otherwise wouldn't. And now that gets them to buy in ways that may not be the case necessarily with some of these other things. So stock options, which again, if you're in a corporation type of entity, this is something you may be familiar with. And it's a right to buy shares at a stated price when you give them out. And the hope is that that's going to appreciate over time. And it's typically subject to a vesting schedule. Same thing with the liquidity bonus. Same thing with the phantom stock. It can be based on time and or performance. So you have a fairly blank slate on which to create those structures. And here, we're not going to get into all the tax nuances, but most stock options you're going to give are non-qualified stock options. So you see the bottom boxes there. No tax on the grant date. So again, when they get it, they don't have to worry about it. When they go to exercise it, it's ordinary income. And the sale date can be some capital gain. So what happens typically, people don't want taxed on the exercise date, which would be the difference between the fair market value when they received it and the value on that exercise date. So let's say they received a stock, it was $1 a share, exercise price, that's today's value. It vests over the next 2 years. Now the stock is worth $5. They can pay that dollar, but they may have tax on the additional $4 appreciation that occurred. And that's not real exciting for the employee. A, they often don't want to pay that dollar, or it could be much more depending on the value. And B, they don't want to get taxed because they got stock now and there's no way to pay that tax often. So what you see typically is employees holding that stock until the company sells. And they never really become owners. That's kind of the irony of the stock options. They really don't become owners typically. This can be different if they're given out for pennies at the founding stage, but as the company grows, you see that people will wait until the company sells and exercise and cash out simultaneously. So in that hypothetical, if it started out at $1 and now it's $5, they'll just say, cash me out at the sale and give me my $4. And then, that dollar was paid by virtue of the fact that they didn't take the full 5, just the delta between the 5 and the 1. Restricted stock is giving not an option to buy stock, but actual stock. And so instead of saying, hey, you have an option or right to buy stock in the future, this is you actually giving stock and then saying you could take it back. And so it's giving a number of shares in a company and saying that you will forfeit it if things don't happen. And again, those vesting conditions or reverse vesting conditions can be time and or performance based. And there is an opportunity to mitigate the tax implications. Again, not going to get into tons of detail here, but there is an 83B election option. And for the employee, this is a gamble because when the restricted stock forfeiture provisions lapse and they've met those requirements, they get taxed on the portion that now is theirs to keep. So if you say, hey, I'm going to give you 5 shares, over the next 5 years, you will have 1 share unlocked, if you will, and the forfeiture will only apply to 1 less share the next year. So 1 each year. Then as each share vests, you look at the fair market value on the date of the vesting, and there can be a tax event based on the fair market value at the time. So one way to avoid that is to pay all the tax up front and say, I'm going to gamble that A, the value is going to appreciate, and B, that I'll still be with the company and still own the stock, and I'll pay all the tax today. And I avoid some tax, bigger tax bills later on. I take care of it today. And again, it's the gamble that you're going to be there to collect and keep the stock, and that the value is going to appreciate. If one or both of those things don't happen, it was a bad bet. But lots of employees take advantage of the 83B to make that happen and lock in some better tax treatment. Another thing that is very popular And that is, and probably least well known, although we do these all the time, is the LLC profits interest. So if you're in a limited liability company and taxed as a partnership, which is typically what you have, and I'm a big fan of starting in the LLC structure. I think it has an opportunity to have maximum flexibility and pass-through tax treatment. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You can raise capital in the LLC. You may run into a situation where some investors want you to convert to a C Corp, but there's lots of capital that gets raised in the LLC structure just fine. So I like to start out that way. And one of the questions you get is, how do I incentivize folks like I would in a corporation? Can I give out stock options? Can I give out restricted stock? And typically the answer is, you can't really do stock options. They don't work well in the LLC for a whole host of reasons. But you can give out kind of analogous to the restricted stock, a LLC profits interest. So what is that? It's actual ownership. So if you're talking about in the LLC context, units instead of shares, you can give out the profits interest, and it's called a profits interest because of the way it's taxed. It's actual equity, actual units in the company, often non-voting, and there is no tax bill when you give them to the employee. So recall just a few slides ago, we talked through the tax implications of both the stock options and the restricted stock, and you can see that that can cause some pain to the employees. It can cause them not to exercise the options until you sell. Here, not a problem. So you give actual equity, and it provides a share of the future growth, which is what you're giving it to them for. Just like in all these cases, you want them to participate in the growth to come. So they don't get a piece of current value like they would if you give them a share of restricted stock, for example. But again, to me, that's aligned with what most employers are going to expect. I want you to be with the company, help grow it, and if you do, you're going to get a piece of that future value. So I think the alignment is perfect with the employers and the employees. And they contribute services. They don't have to make any kind of cash contribution. If you want them to buy in, again, that's just the purchase of equity. You can certainly do that as well. But this deal is different. It's just saying that we'll give you units today, and there's no tax on them. It's a piece of future growth, and a little hypothetical may help make some sense of that. If the company's worth $100 today and you give out 10%, and then you grow the company and sell it a year later for $200, what does the employee get who received that 10% profits interest? Well, they get 10 bucks. They don't get a piece of that first $100 because that was historic value that already existed when you gave out the profits interest, but you did grow the company together with their help $100 in that second year. And so with 10% profits interest, they would get 10% of that second 100, that appreciated value. So that's $10. So that's the deal. And again, a really easy to use, powerful tool, something that we see all the time, and really makes, if ownership, actual ownership is the key to incentivizing folks, can really be a useful tool. Other critical issues you have to think about when you're giving out actual company ownership. We've mentioned tax. You really make sure you understand the implications for both you and the employee. You want to make sure that they're not getting a surprise tax bill, giving them a piece of equity or other incentives only to make them realize they're getting whacked with some tax at the year end is not going to make them too happy. You got to make sure you understand the accounting treatment, of course, for how you're going to do that. And you need to understand, of course, it's not just your company, which is difficult for lots of founders to kind of get their arms around. Their view is, hey, if I give out 5 or 10%, and particularly if it's non-voting, I can continue to do as the founder basically whatever I want. And there are ways to put in place documents and other things to help that. But bottom line is you typically are going to have fiduciary duties. So now you've got to do what's best for everyone and not just you as the founder. Lots of times your founder perspective is aligned with what's best for everybody, but not always. And you've got to follow corporate protocols, which is another reason I really like the LLC, at least to start, because there are very few corporate protocols with the LLC. It's only basically what you create as opposed to a corporation, which have lots of them. You absolutely need a shareholders agreement. Even if you're giving out non-voting minority pieces of the company, there are lots of things that you can't do with minority owners that you'll want to do. And you see some of those on the screen there. For time's sake, we won't get into great detail. But you want to be able to continue to operate and sell the company and keep control as appropriate. And without putting in place an agreement among the owners, that's not going to shake out the way you think. The corporate statute, the LLC statute, does not create kind of this default playbook that lots of people think it does. They say, well, if I don't put anything in place, I don't want to spend the time and money to do that. I'm sure the Arizona Corporation statute has all that I need in there. And it has a few things. The LLC Act has a few things, but it may not be the things you think it has, and it may create unintended consequences, and usually does. And so there are things that that both of those statutes simply don't contemplate, and you want to make sure that you bake into your agreement. So when things go sideways, or there's disputes, or people leave, you have a smooth transition out of the company, a smooth opportunity to buy them out, an easy way to resolve disputes, or at least a mechanism to resolve disputes, and get the stock back potentially, and make sure that you preserve the enterprise value. We see far too many companies where this hasn't happened, and it's an absolute disaster when people start fighting. There's no playbook, and so it's pretty chaotic. And typically, if the company survives, lots of time, money, and effort have been spent to engage in that fight, and the value has been severely diminished. Finally, you got to pay attention when you're giving out actual equity to the securities, federal and state securities laws, and I think this is our last topic, and I know we're just about out of time, so we'll wrap things up. Anytime you give out stock or a profits interest, any kind of equity, whether it's through the options, it's through them purchasing it, etc., you need to make sure you comply with federal and state securities rules. Why do you care about that? Well, having worked with entrepreneurs for 20 years, I know folks don't like to dive into these. They're complex, lots of nuances in there, and they just oftentimes get ignored. The best takeaway is that if you breach the securities laws, it's a felony, not a good thing to staple to your entrepreneurial resume. So, we can certainly help you navigate through those, and you want to make sure you partner up with someone who's got deep expertise and can help you navigate those rules. They do get a bit complex, but the good news is, with respect to giving out ownership for employee incentive purposes, you have one of the best and easiest to use rules, which is Rule 701 you see on the screen there. And a lot of the rules to raise capital and other things, again, get a little complicated. Rule 701 is about as straightforward as you get in the securities world. Again, it's all relative, but it allows you to bring people aboard, give equity without having to go through lots of the hoops that you would do to raise capital for your company in a traditional sense. So as long as you fall within the guidelines, you're not necessarily required to give a ton of disclosure. You still have to have a plan and so forth, but again, very easy to navigate. So it's something that you need to think through before you jump in there. Just some more information on 701, and again, happy to chat with any of you as you think through some of these incentive programs. Just like to close with a plug for our Emerging Business Seminar Series. Some of you may have attended this. We're in our 12th year, I believe, and something I started way back when to help give entrepreneurs and their companies a way to get a good look at some key topics and get a high-level perspective. All the topics and programs are similar to what you've seen today. We've done probably 60 some over the course of time. We repeat the favorites every now and then. We're going to talk about how to structure joint ventures and strategic alliances. They're typically at SkySong. We're virtual now, like everything. So they're the first Wednesday of each month. If you are interested, shoot me an email. Let me know that you'd like to be on the list. They're all free, and you're welcome to attend. I also do other seminars in other forums like this one, and post those on my personal website. So you can check that out at brianjburt.com/events, and you can monitor that for future programs as well. So with that, I think we've got 2 or 3 or 4 minutes left. If there's any questions that you have, feel free to post them in the question and answer box, and be happy to take those.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. We'll give a few moments for people who do have questions. I did notice that a lot of people were interested in the slides that you shared with us today. So again, today's recorded session will be on our website, And if you do want the slides from today, please email Brian directly. His email is in the chat box. But if you don't want to check it out, it's bburt@swlaw.com. And that way he can send this full presentation to you directly. But I know that was a huge request that we've received, Brian. So I think what you shared with us today is very, very important to a lot of people.
Well, that sounds good. We'll give it another minute, and yeah, happy to share the program. Again, happy to chat with you offline as well. I know there's a lot of information packed in, but hopefully you found some good nuggets as you roll into the year end. It's a great time to think about, what type of programs you're going to put in place for next year. I think it's more so than any other year. I think employees really want to know what's coming, and so it may be a great time to take a little pause and put something in place that's going to get them excited as you hopefully roll into a little less stressful 2021.
Let's hope. All right, Brian, we seem to not have any additional questions. So again, this will be uploaded to our website. And if you have any questions for Brian, you can reach out to him directly. But with all of that, we hope that you join us next week for our 2 boot camps and special session happening next Wednesday. So thank you again, Brian, for your dedication to small businesses in Arizona and helping us with our small business boot camp. We are just so thankful to have you present with us.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
All right. Thank you all and have a great day.